Thank you, Modi, and thank you all for being here. Uh, I thought for the first half hour, I will kind of share with you my life's journey in the areas of biodiversity and food and health, um, and then we can have a dialogue. Yeah? Now, I'm not trained in any of these fields at all. I'm trained in quantum theory. I did a PhD in non-locality and quantum and hidden variables. And I thought that's what I do all my life. After all, people are busy 100 years later with the same problems. And I thought for the rest of my life I could be busy with this, but two things happened. I got involved with the Chipko movement, which is women coming out to defend the forests, because they watched how deforestation in the Himalaya was leading to landslides, to floods, to droughts, and they totally saw the connection. And yet the scientific theory of scientific forestry was that the forests are timber mines, and we should be growing uniform species that are commercially valuable. So natural forests were being destroyed, and with it all the functions, and the women rose. And for a decade I volunteered for this amazing movement. I call it my other university. I studied in Canada for a PhD, but I studied with the women who'd never been to school. Every lesson of biodiversity, every lesson of ecology I learned from them. And the other lesson I learned from them this morning, if you were here, Satish was talking about economy and ecology. For the women, it was so clear that the economy is a subset of the ecology, but most importantly, the other two are not separate. Because the dominant thesis of that time used to be, you've got to get rich to care for the environment. Yeah? And therefore you must destroy the forest in order to get rich, in order to think of protecting the forest. And they still say that kind of language. And here were the women, knowing that they are related to the forest, the series is on relationship, and they depend on the forest. Now, having sort of, I had a quantum background, I had my Chipko background, and both were the same. They were about non-separation. You cannot divide. And there is no superiority. The quantum world, you can't say this is an object and here's an observer, and the object is passive. Without the observer, there's no measurement. And in the ecological world, we are not masters of the earth. So I wrote a book. My first book was called Staying Alive. And the book was trying to solve the puzzle. Why do the women see the forest as living and sacred? And how come the dominant system sees forests as timber mines? Where does this mindset come from? And so I read all the big boys of that time. The Bacons and the Boyles and the Locks. And I really realized later, like we are friends, we get to know each other. They were friends. They knew each other. And they were working out a philosophy, which was an economy, which was an epistemology, which was a science, which was private property. So Locke said, we've got to own the earth. And Bacon said, the earth is inert, dead material. I will teach her. He wrote a book called Masculine Birth of Time. And he said, I will teach you to make nature your slave. And this was what the books were, and these are still the books that teach us. So even, I don't think you know that the Royal Society had an objective of implementing Bacon's philosophy of masculine domination, declaring the earth as dead, and torturing the earth. Because he was also in charge of Inquisition. And from that time onwards, I started to see everywhere. How come some people see rivers as this much kilowatt of energy, and the people of the river see it as a sacred mother? Yeah? And so much of discussion here about indigenous worldviews is about not only the worldviews that allow us to live at peace with the earth, but worldviews that were criminalized. You know, they were made illegal everywhere. In my country, I went to give a talk at the 100 years of the first Ayurvedic college because they had tried to ban Ayurveda. And if you see the books of that time, you should see their books on yoga. On everything, you know. The perception was twisted. So they saw everything, all learning, as twisted. And I have called it ecological apartheid. Because apartheid is the African word for separateness. And that's why the apartheid regime was created. But I also see that apartheid as our relationship with nature, so I call it ecological apartheid. The illusion that we are separate from nature. And most importantly, I see it as epistemological apartheid. Just the declaration that torturing nature is science and living at peace with nature is, in our countries, it was called superstition by the colonizers. And in Europe, it was called witch hunts. You remember 9 million people were killed, women were killed for knowing the herbs that heal. Of course, Mr. Rockefeller continued that work after he became the monopolizer of oil. The first thing he did was ban healing traditions. And he created the pharmaceutical industry. And probably you don't know that he, with IG Farben, the German cartel of Hitler, worked on every chemical in Germany to kill people in concentration camps and to use in the wars, the poison gases. And you know, it came from war. And then after the war, they just decided, you know, we know how to kill human beings. Why don't we now pretend these are to kill the pests? So pesticides, the ammunition factories that burned fossil fuels at high temperature to fix atmospheric nitrogen, they then became the nitrogen fertilizers. And the ecological footprint of nitrogen fertilizers is actually more than all the flights of the world, all the commercial flights of the world. So not only is it destroying the soil, we do studies on this. We compare chemical soils and organic soils. And chemical soils are desertified because its purpose is to kill life. But it emits the worst greenhouse gas. You know, there's such silence in climate change on nitrous oxide because it comes from synthetic fertilizers. And everyone is pushing more industrialization of farming. Now the slogan is farming without farmers, food without farms. Yeah? So we've got to get rid of the farmers. You first got rid of them with chemicals and big machines, and now you have to add the drones and the smartphones. And you've got to now tell the farmers, you don't have heads. You know, you don't know. So I say, you know, the 3 steps of declaring emptiness. The first was colonial, when they created Terra Madre, the living Mother Earth, into Terra Nullius, the empty land. And then when the seed issue came up, they declared seed was empty. And I basically say now, with all the whole digital agriculture, digital food, digital everything digital, it's basically an assumption that the head is empty, mente nullius. We have no minds. Nature doesn't have a mind. So what really made me turn to agriculture was in the year 1984. in Punjab, which is where I done my MSc Honours in Physics, very peaceful. In 84, violence erupted, 15,000 people died. And that same year in the city of Bhopal, a pesticide plant leaked at 2 a.m., killing people, thousands of people. So even now, they say, oh, pesticides are safe. I said, I have watched people die. You know, I'm not going to believe your myth that pesticides are safe. And for Punjab, I was working for the United Nations University, and I was working on conflicts over resources, and my work was really to show how all violence comes from conflicts over the earth's resources. You know, always land wars, oil wars, water wars. And I said, in Punjab, there's something going on, because my news clippings used to tell me this is about water and it's about famine. But suddenly, overnight, they changed the narrative and made it about religion. But there was no religious conflict. First, it can't be, because Punjab is the land of the Sikhs, and you have enough of them in this country. And the Sikhs, you know, it's a 500-year-old religion. And even the Hindu families of Punjab, they offer their older son to Sikhism. So there can't be a conflict within that society between those two religions. There was during our Indian partition. So I said, so where is the conflict? Where's the roots of this violence? And because of my quantum training, you know, in the mechanical world, everything is inert, everything is a separate particle, and the only way things can move and change is by force. You know, Newton's law, force. But in the quantum world, everything is related anyway. You know? So if I measure one particle, I have in fact found everything about a related world. You can't separate. That's what we call non-locality and non-separation. The second thing about the quantum world is you cannot predict, you know, that this is a particle or this is a wave. The only thing you can say is here's the context of measuring a wave or a particle. So we replaced Cartesian causality, A moves B, with a contextual causality, that the context decides what will happen to anything. A context decides peace. A context decides violence and war. And so understanding the context is the key issue. Not linearity. Not two-dimensional causality. And so what's the context? So I started to go back half the time, and I'd be traveling. Buses were bombed, trains were bombed, and I had to cancel my trip, but I still completed my study. It's called The Violence of the Green Revolution. And that's where I found, basically in the 60s, something called the Green Revolution was introduced to Punjab. It's just industrial agriculture and under a fake name. You know, these days everything fake is called green. You know? So industrial farming that came from war was called the Green Revolution. But it was causing a war. It was destroying the soil, it was destroying the water, it disappeared. Did I carry this? Punjab means the land of 5 rivers. The water of Punjab. They use 10 times more water to grow chemical food than food through ecological systems. 10 times more water. So water must disappear. I have a book in which, I have the maps of the disappearing water. But the farmers were in debt, you know, because the story of the Green Revolution always, India would have starved without the Green Revolution, we saved them. No, we had the last big famine in 42, when we were ruled by the British. 45 trillion was transferred from India and the peasants of India to England. But because it was extracted from the peasants, 60 million people died of famine in India in the 200 years of British rule. 60 million. Many, many books on this. There's one called The Victorian Holocaust. There's another by a dear friend of mine, Shashi Tharoor, The Era of Darkness. Do read it, because it gives a sense, because that's our common history. Yeah. So I started to study every aspect. I read every textbook they teach in agriculture. Soil is an empty container. Plant is a machine, and fossil fertilizers are the fuel to run it. And I said, but this is absolute rubbish. Yeah? Nature just disappeared. So I didn't know. I had no idea there's organic and biodynamic. I had no idea. But I just knew this is war, and I want to work on a peace. So I used to give it, I called it the ahimsic. Ahimsa is Gandhi's word for peace. And so I said, I'm going to look for practice farming that does not do violence to the earth. And that's nature's ways. Many names, all the systems. But at the end of it, all the systems practice 3 laws of nature. The first law is biodiversity. Nature never works in monoculture. Never. The second, the morning session was on the cycles, Everything is recycled. Nature does it herself, but when we work with nature to grow our food, then what Howard called it was the law of return. It's such a powerful idea. And for those of you who don't know, Albert Howard, was sent by the British in 1905 to improve Indian agriculture. And he arrived and he says the soils are fertile. And there are lots of insects but no pest damage. So I'm going to make the pest and the peasant my professor. I will learn from them how to do good farming. And he wrote the book called The Agricultural Testament, which is called the Bible of Modern Organic Farming. And that's where he lays out the law of return. So good farming is the law of return, giving back. Tiny bits of what the earth has given you. You don't need to go blast chemical fertilizer, fossil fuels. You just need to take a very tiny portion of what the earth grows for you and turn it into an organic return. And there are hundreds of ways to do the return. The biodynamic people do it in their way. In India, we have, at least 30 kinds of compost system. We learned composting from India and spread it to the world. Of course, at some point, because I challenged the GMOs, and maybe I should talk to you briefly about that. But because by then I was promoting both seed saving and organic, and Monsanto would put these big articles saying Vandana Shiva is importing a foreign technology called organic. So I started to do the Harvard lectures. So India would remember that organic went from India to the rest of the world. And this is not this alien technology. It's from nature, it's from our soil. The alien one is trying to manipulate the seed in order to own it. So I happened to be invited in 1987 because I'd done this book on the Green Revolution, and there were no ecological impact books at that time. And I was called to this meeting at the UN, and the industry was also there, and they said, we have to do genetic engineering because the only way we can take a patent to seed, because a patent is taken for an invention. So by doing genetic engineering, we will take patents on seed, and we will write an international law that will forbid farmers from saving seeds. I said, everything you're talking about is totally unethical, unscientific. Adding a gene through genetic engineering is not the making of a seed, which is a complex living organism. Scientists have named it Autopoiesis, life that writes its own poetry. And the external manipulation is called Autopoiesis. That's what's put together from the outside. And from 1987 to now, the seed has been my teacher. And of course I've learned that it's autopoietic, it's self-organized, self-regulated. The beauty is you put a seed, you get the plant. Now Darwin talked about competition between species, and he talked about why a particular beak became like it did. But he didn't talk about how life replenishes itself in perfect patterns. I have seen in genetic engineering labs monsters. Plants are all distorted. Sheep, like Dolly the sheep, 273 sheep, but all the sisters of Dolly were monsters. One didn't have ears, one didn't have eyes, one didn't have two legs. And so they were butchered right away. But Dolly herself is in a museum now. No? Because this arrogance of always beating nature creates extremely crude experiments. So on the flight back from Geneva, I said, I took my notebooks and started to work. How do you get freedom? And I went back to our freedom movement, and the 3 lessons of Gandhi are what came alive to me. The first, that you have to be self-organized. And that's what the seed does, but that's what we must do as community. This is a self-organized festival. Second, you've got to learn to make your things. After all, the British had made sure that all our textile industry was destroyed. Everything was dumped from here, from Lancashire and Manchester. And Gandhi pulled out the spinning wheel and said, we must make our own clothing. You know, the hand-spun, hand-woven khadi? That became our symbol of freedom. And the third, of course, is such an important idea, that we've got to live by truth. And the power of truth is our power. He called it satyagrah. He practiced it in South Africa against the racist regime, 1906 to 1911, and had those laws undone. Then he came back to India. So satyagrah, the power of truth, is a power within that reaches out. And it is an unconquerable power. Totally. It cannot be subjugated. And he, did that with the salt, and we said we'll do that with the seed. So we created seed banks. I've created 150 community seed banks. But I worked with government at that time because, this beginning of WTO globalization, governments hadn't been hijacked at that time. So I could tell them. So I told them 2 things. Farmers are the first breeders. So they must have rights. The breeders are not the industry. The first breeders are not the industry. They steal from farmers and take a right. And the second is, all of life is a family. We are one earth family. We have a beautiful word for it in Sanskrit, and it is called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I think one reason India in the past, managed to not have too much argument is because we named everything in 1,000 ways. The goddess is 1,000 names, Lalita Sahasranam. The Ganges has 1,000 names. Everything in nature, because it's so diverse, its expressions are so diverse. And, my friends in the movement, organic movement, for so long, I used to say, stop fighting with each other, who's superior, biodynamic, permaculture, organic. We're all the same. And words don't matter. Yeah? Words don't matter. The doing matters, the relationship matters. So, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means this family of the earth. Vasudhara is one of the names of the earth. She's Dharti, she's Bhumi, and Kutumbakam is her family. So I would go talk to Parliament and say, plants and trees and seeds are our relatives in our philosophy. We cannot own them through patents. They believed it. And they put a clause, Article 3 in our patent law, plants, animals and seeds are not human inventions. Therefore, they cannot be patented. And this is a law that Monsanto's been trying to knock out ever since it was put in place. And so far, they haven't managed. Yeah. so far they have not managed. We recognize. And the point is, at the end of the day, even if, and around the world they're trying to make it illegal. The morning there was a Colombian sister who talked about the illegality of saving seeds, which is what they want. I said, you are so desperate. You people are so pathetic. You are so weak that you have to destroy the freedom of others to even carve out your space in the market. You know, real confidence should be you bring your product, let it go through tests, let it be compared, and let the people choose. What is this kind of thing where you force people, you know, this GMO seeds was forced. It has never entered any country by choice. It's entered by corruption. It's entered by lying. GMOs cannot increase production because the production comes from the original plant you're using. All you did was shoot a gene. The gene is either a Roundup Ready gene or a Bt toxin gene. It's a toxic increase. It's not a yield increase. And we were repeatedly told yield is what increased with the Green Revolution. Industrial farming feeds the world. Now there are 4 ways in which actually industrial farming has reduced the food in the world and health in the world and nutrition in the world. Let me quickly wrap up so that we can ask questions, but let me run through this. So, you know, Norman Borlaug was a guy given the Nobel Peace Prize for the so-called Green Revolution. For him, it was merely introducing fertilizer. But the fertilizers, the plants didn't adapt to the fertilizer. So he said, we must make these tall plants that are for humans, that are for soil, that is for animals. We must make them dwarf so it can take up the fertilizer. So he made these dwarf varieties by crossing. And he trained 12 scientists and he called them his apostles. You know, for me, GMO leading to patents is basically Monsanto saying, God, move over. I have no place here. And Borlaug basically was saying, I'm Christ. I have 12 apostles. So one of his apostles, Swaminathan, said we didn't really increase any yield. If the original was 1,000 kilograms, we changed the partition. We put 500 in grain and 500 in store. We shrunk the store. Whereas traditionally it was 300 in grain and 700 in straw. But 700 is food for the rest of our family. It is the straw animals eat. It's the straw we compost and give back to the soil. So in effect, the system was depriving our fellow beings of their right to food. But those fellow beings are what makes for food. Without the earthworms, without the mycorrhizal fungi, we do research on our farm. 1/3 of the food we eat comes from pollinators. You spray pesticides, you spray or you have GMOs, there's no pollinators. 1/3 of our food disappears. So your dwarfing shrinks, but biodiversity to monoculture shrinks. So I said yield per acre only tells you the commodity that leaves to the market. It doesn't tell you how much was produced overall. So we're going to measure health per acre, not yield per acre. We won't measure commodity, we will measure health. We can feed 2 times the world's population by protecting and regenerating nature. 2 times the world. Of course, we address the very artificial hunger problem, and you know the idea that third world people are primitive, but then our seeds were called primitive. We've just done a study of our ancient rices. We've saved 4,000 kinds of rice in our seed banks. At our farm, we grow 750. So we took 200 and we compared them to the so-called modern varieties, as they call it. Across the board, the average of native varieties in terms of vital nutrients, calcium, iron, magnesium, zinc, is between 150% to 200% more than the modern varieties. So what yield are you measuring? So what we've grown is nutritionally empty food. and 70 to 80% of the nourishment in industrial farms is gone. It's not there. And there's so many studies of this. I mean, the other day a few years ago, there was a British medical journal, I think, which showed how much more nutrition organic food has and how much less the chemical food has. But the two new things that I think all of you should take home from this festival of medicine is that the same issues, we are part of the earth, we are not separate. And as part of the earth, our health and the health of the earth is the same health. Yeah? So our diseases are showing up as chronic diseases. 75% of the chronic diseases today are related to the industrial food system. 75%. But you can treat the earth as dead, and then what you will try and do is fix the earth all the time. You do geoengineering, spray aerosols in the sky, change the food, make fake food. But if you recognize the simple basic issue that the earth is living, and she has evolved over nearly 4 billion years, then we start to realize that what we call the ecological crises are actually the health crisis of the earth. And that's why I've called climate change as the metabolic disorder of a living earth. Just like we suffer from metabolic disorders, the earth is suffering from metabolic disorders. So how do we do that? A lot of young people are going into trauma. What do I do? Because they're still living in this alienated mindset. The earth is dead. We can't do anything. And then the people who've made so much money destroying the earth want to make more money destroying the earth. Mr. Bill Gates is the big problem right now. Because we did trials of Monsanto, and Monsanto got eaten up by Bayer. So, in a way, all of Monsanto's role Gates is playing, But he's doing more, This morning we had asked him talk about the whole vaccine question. Who financed it? 52 billion he made through his investments. So I've done 2 books. One is called Oneness versus 1%, which I did with my son. And another is called Philanthrocapitalism, which I've done with all the movements on Gates. And this began in 2015. It's very, very recent. But he's the big pusher now of the 3 areas which for me are of concern. The first is geoengineering, as if the climate didn't know how to manage its temperature and its climate. But the earth has. She's a self-regulating Gaia. Her biosphere regulates the atmosphere and the climate. The second thing is, of course, fake food. And his examples are so absurd. Breast milk in a lab as a climate solution. Not just fake meat, but fake milk, fake dairy, fake ice cream, fake anything under the sun. Now, all this will need feedstock. Just like you take the cows off the grazing and put them in a factory farm. It's not that they stop eating. They need more food. They need more intensive food. So the feedstock increases with factory farming. With lab food, the feedstock will increase even more, 5 times more acreage. But worse, 25 times more emissions, because this is a high energy system. Every time you use external energy, you create entropy, you create emissions. So energy is the secret to look at. That's why, another word he created was, we have to dematerialize the world and digitalize everything. I said, using more resources. They're using more energy for the computers and the artificial intelligence. But on the other hand, you work with the earth in gratitude, with love, and say, you are the teachers. You have evolved this planet 4 billion years, brought the temperature down from 290 degrees to 13 degrees, brought down the carbon dioxide from 98% to 0.03%. All we have to do is turn to the earth. How did she do it? She did it with photosynthesis. She did it with biodiversity intensification. That's the kind of farming we do in Navdanya, and I do. Many of you will come, in September we will start our annual course. Might be too late for any of you to think of it, but think of next year. And then Satish and I, since we started the school in Dehradun, we've been offering a course on Gandhi in different ways. This year it's on the triple piece. And he'll come back again next year. So go to the website of Navdanya, Navdanya, and you can write to Earth University at navdanya.net. But, we practice it, we measure, we do. It's quite amazing. The temperature difference between our farm and trees and neighboring farms with chemical fertilizers in the soil is 25 degrees in the soil. Soil moisture difference is 15%. So turning to nature is the only way we can address all the crises that a greed system, a colonial system, a fossil chemical system has created. And the same processes that are destroying the metabolism of the earth are destroying our gut. Because health comes from the soil, health comes from biodiversity. 100 trillion of our partners in our body. We're only 10% of ourselves. For me, just in the last few years, the amazing knowledge that's bursting on the relationship between the soil, the gut, the brain, shows so clearly we are interbeings. We just cannot be separated. Every moment of our life, we breathe, we are interbeings. The trees give us our breath. We eat, we are interbeings. And waking up to these daily miracles. To me, photosynthesis is a miracle and a technology. And research is now showing that we could, in 10 years, if 10% farms went organic, we could get rid of the built-up emissions and neutralize all the emissions in 10 years. It's about around 30 gigatons emissions. The absorption capacity of the plants, the photosynthesis, the soil adds up to that. But we can intensify it more, even more, grow more food, have more oxygen, have more beauty, have more love, have more health. Thank you. We have 15 minutes.
It's an honor to even speak to you. When I see you, I see physical manifestation of Shakti herself sitting in front of me. I'm feeling goosebumps when I see you. Maybe I should go back reading more of your books, but I have been following you and seeing you in spirit while you are being the sacred voice on behalf of the nation, which has so much of wisdom coming from. My question to you is, as a young Indian who's 33-year-old standing in front of you, and that's Uma for you.
Yeah.
So as a young Indian who lives in Ireland now, I work with women and I help women learn Ayurveda and spirituality of pregnancy and conceive consciously. Now, living in this Western world, when I look at Ayurveda and yoga, I see how culturally appropriation is being done with the wisdom and the science of it. Everybody is in too much of rush, going to India, learning things in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and coming back and teaching them to more people. I am aware that everyone is on their own journey, but somebody who believes that one should embody the values before even teaching it to someone else, what is your message to young Indians who are living outside and feel deeply rooted into their culture but feel that it is being misinterpreted or it's not being projected or portrayed in the right manner? Thank you.
So, my attitude to any situation where there's distortion, appropriation, is always to actually practice and think more authenticity. So you're always there as the light. Because, you know, we can spend all our lives seeing where things are inadequate. But the only way that heritage of true knowledge gets spread around the world is by its true practice. Therefore, authenticity. You be authentic. You be authentic. Let the 1 month in Rishikesh, you know, our place is next to Rishikesh. And I've seen how that city has become the ultimate commodity of yoga. They churn it out, and because the whole world has been reduced to a money-making machine, down to traditions like yoga. Yeah, I've spoken a lot at the yoga festival there, right on the banks of the Ganges, and I always talk about the Ganges in the mountains. I said, you know, it's just not a bunch of, it's the joining, it's the interconnection. So deepen your knowledge and deepen your authenticity.
Good afternoon. I come from a legal background, and I would like to ask what each country legal system has to have to protect the vitality of nature, of like sustain the health of humanity, and not allow the big dominant voice to take over.
Yeah.
Are there insecurities which can be implemented? Can you name a few?
Well, you know, we've had 3-4 centuries of colonial law, and that's called law. You know, after the collapse of the Copenhagen summit, the Bolivian president of that time, Evo Morales, called many of us and said, you know, we were here to protect the rights of Mother Earth, not the rights of the polluters. So I'm going to go back and write a declaration of Mother Earth. Look for it, a draft declaration of the rights of Mother Earth. And we all put it together. And after that, I mean, there's been a lot of talk, a lot by the lawyer committee, and I always tell them, you do not give rights to nature. We recognize rights of nature. So what are the laws that will protect? Bring back reverence in your laws. Bring back integrity and relationships in the laws. Reduce the commodification. This morning I mentioned how the two international treaties we wrote at the Earth Summit, the Climate Treaty and the Biodiversity Treaty, are both being appropriate for money making. Not for protecting, but for money making. So biodiversity offset, carbon offsets, you know. And I've always resisted this. I say, oh, farmers aren't making money and therefore let them get some money for the carbon. I said, no, they should also get money for healthy food and be respected for the love and work they do. Because today you will give them $5 and tomorrow you'll give them 5 cents. Because that's how volatile this market is. So we need to shift from economy as money making. Aristotle had a very powerful word for it, called climatistics, to economy as oikonomia, the art of living. And then law catches up with the science to say everything is interrelated. It catches up with our relationship with nature. It catches up with spirituality and all that, just like bringing commons back. You know, Locke created private property. But now we need to regenerate the commons. This country had 200 years of defense on the commons by the peasants of this country. 200 years. They refused to let go of their land. We need to reclaim the commons. So these are some elements. Reverence, commons, and doing a true economics, because that's what I've done. Every time they say, oh, we grow more, I show how they actually have very inferior systems. They create scarcity. If I have a seed and I can grow 100,000 seeds out of one seed, I have more seed. But if I turn that seed into a non-renewable GMO hybrid, there's no seed next season. So is this more or is this more? So we just have to overcome these illusions that actually create the illusion of growth when they create scarcity.
Yes, next question. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you give this back to her?
I'm happy to hear that there's somebody who's still believing in politics. I don't anymore. I'm afraid they don't want us to be independent and healthy, really, because there's a lot of money they earn by serving the elites. That's, yeah, I don't know, maybe you can tell something about, but that's not my question, but it's related. Maybe you can tell about something about politics too.
Which she didn't ask a question of politics. She asked a
No,
question
about the
on
law, but
about law.
politics make
But law we will need. You know, the law first should be common law. You know? The relationship of this estate with the land and people, you know? So that the three levels of law are relationship. Those are laws. They're laws that come from within. Then there's community laws, that's laws of the commons. And the third is state laws. And I would say fourth is the international laws. So, like I said, the state laws have all been based on colonial or colonization. That's all it was for. That's all it was for. We definitely need to deepen our capacity to write our inner laws. That's spirituality. We need to build stronger community to write our common laws. And we will have to, basically self-organize in order to not allow a free hand of what I call the 1%. Because at this point, what they're doing, and I started to see it at the beginning of globalization, but it's much more intense now. They criminalize citizens practicing their freedom. Saving your seed, growing your own food. I mean, they arrested nuns who used to bring cakes to a hospital. This is dangerous. Violates the phytosanitary measures. And meantime, they're deregulating their own activities, which is the laws for regulation, to the environment, biosafety, forests, countryside, all of this. So, rules and laws, I do not believe they should ever come fully top down. They should be where people live, and the rights flow from the responsibilities, in a very natural way. But the other thing that I'm absolutely convinced about is the higher more distant you go from people's lives, the only thing centralized government should do is prevent the harm. That's all. They should have a role in preventing war. They should have a role in banning pesticides. That's their role. Their role is not to forbid farming. That's not their work, it's our work.
Sorry, can I ask my question? Yeah, my question was, I'm a farmer's girl in Belgium, and how can I convince my brother, who's not an organic farmer, to do so? Because when I talk about it, he says the organic agriculture only delivers 60% of the total production that modern farming does.
Tell them to read our books, which will show small-scale producers more, biodiverse producers more, women produce more, organic producers more. Chemical produces commodities, and as long as the system is rewarding you to bring commodities, it's fine. But why are the farmers even of Belgium protesting? Because the supermarkets are ripping them off. The farmers are getting 1% and 2%. They can't make a living, and the costs of production are raised big. So he just needs to, maybe bring him to our farm. Bring him to Natanya. Bring him to Natanya. He'll go away. Yeah.
Hello. I just wanted to say thank you for your curiosity and being so open-minded to question the system, and that little bit of cheeky rebelliousness that allowed you to question a system that everyone else was just following. My question was just a curiosity about whether spirituality and faith has intertwined with your activism, and if so, how?
Spirituality and science?
Whether spirituality and faith has played a role in activism and pushing against toxic systems that need to be changed.
Yeah, so, my activism actually also comes from a science, particularly my quantum background. But, I grew up in a very spiritual family. And this was our life. And, but not spirituality as a removal from the world, but an engagement in the world. Yeah? So, because Descartes created the mind, body, mind, matter separation, people think if you're spiritual, you got to run away from matter. But all mind, all matter are spiritual too. Yeah? So, foundational issues of right and wrong, truth, of injustice and justice. That's when I see something, and those issues. When I saw the violence in Punjab, I said, this is so wrong. And I started to seek. We will pattern seeds and do genetic engineering. That's so wrong. It is so wrong to try and claim you are the creator of life. And I would say exactly the same now for transhumanism, where this person, Kurzweil, has actually written a book called The Spiritual Machine. So he's basically destroying humanity. I don't know how many of you have seen recent patterns, Microsoft and Google everywhere. They've made the human being disappear. We are users of their computers. And while we are using, the algorithms in those systems, in those machines, are judging us. The algorithms are allocating value to us. And that will decide whether we are $5 worth in cryptocurrency or $500 worth. Yeah? And I think that is so wrong. So it's purely for that reason of our being part of the living earth, part of a humanity that is consciousness, we shouldn't just treat these changes as inevitable. Yeah?
They're also talking about our brain, using our brains to power the AI. Did you see that?
Well, AI, like I said, is just another word for machine learning.
No, but
that's all it is. And all algorithms are ultimately created by human beings. That's all it is. But it's a bit like real people work, farmers work. All of that work is extracted and is turned into the profits. And the earth is made dead, women are made passive, workers don't produce anything. Yeah? So that's why if we were to map the language being used today to put intelligence in the machine and rob us and the earth of intelligence, it's a deeper colonialism. But it's a colonialism that is shaping an end of our being fully human on a living earth. And that's why we must be fully aware and conscious of who we are, what the earth is, and understand tools and technology for the limitations. And the use. I'm not addicted to a phone. Most of the time I don't hear it. But never turn tools into masters.
Hi. It seems to me that you're completely fearless, and that kind of surprises me because I know Monsanto and these corporations are very powerful. They send death threats against activists. And I was wondering, I presume that has probably happened to you before, and if you felt afraid, if you've ever considered stopping, maybe because of consequences on your own mental health and the people around you, and where you get your courage from. Like, how do you keep on going despite the immense power and threats that these companies are presumably putting against you?
So two simple responses to that. The first is, I've known their power, and therefore I've created the work with resilience and decentralization. So I didn't create a centralized seed bank, I distributed everywhere. Monsanto came into India illegally, and as every country they have entered illegally, but I sued them because I'd been part of writing the laws of my country. I sued them, and the day I was going to file this case, that evening, that whole day, they hounded me, and in the evening, they basically called and threatened that if I was to file this case, to be sure I wouldn't be there. So I called my friends. I said, here's a writ I was to file tomorrow. If they do something to me, you file it. Yeah. So I think the two reasons people become afraid. The first is this false illusionary power of big money, big bullying is treated as real power, and we forget our power. And the second is related to the fact that, we often get into the Atlas syndrome. I'm doing important work, it all rests on me. Yeah? And I say, why Atlas syndrome? Because Atlas has the earth being carried. I said, no, we are not. Atlas is carrying the earth is carrying us. We're just one among millions of species. And in movements, we're one among many. So, the constant awareness that you're not alone, and never try and be alone. Distribute, share. And then even if they do something to you, they won't get, they trouble you. But why on earth? If I have chosen to protect seeds, if I have decided to resist an agricultural war, every moment of my life and my work is a celebration of the earth. Why would I be afraid?
Firstly, I want to thank you, because what you're doing is astounding, standing up against these big things. And it gives other people the faith that they can actually do this as well. There's quite a few of us here that grow not just veg, but community, and the community to grow that, and the importance of that. There's a big part of this festival that's important, thinks this is important too. One of my questions is chemtrails. We grow all of our veg organically. We water from the sky, from rainwater. And even Charles Dowden is now saying, grow just in polytunnels, because the water that is falling on what we're eating is also horrendous for our health. So do we just keep the faith that our bodies will adapt to what it is that we are being bombarded with, or is there a scientific or a spiritual way, or have you got any views on chemtrails, or what it is that's coming out of the sky onto our food?
Well, if there's genetic engineering of living organisms, and that's wrong without looking at what the impacts are, geoengineering of the planet as a whole, chemtrails is just one expression of it, but it's geoengineering of the planet as a whole. That is actually worse than genetic engineering. Because genetic engineering is done at an organism level. This is done at the planetary level. And I don't think, of course, we should create as much resilience as possible. But I really do feel we need to find ways, because for at least 10 years, anyone who was pointing out to genetic engineering was treated as a conspiracy theorist, and hounded out. And if they were doing research, there were so many groups that would go in the sky and actually measure the chemicals being sprayed. And they were shut down, their websites were shut down. I think this is so big an issue that we need to find, there is actually a treaty that evolved out of originally a military treaty, but it's now called NMOD. It's an environment modification treaty. And I think we need to have more and more governments ban this engineering. We need to have internationally somehow some willing little island nation somewhere to file a case, you know? It's not an issue of their ground, it's our ground. It's the Earth's ground. It's the Earth's ground. And, you know, there was a group of Sami from Sweden. Mr. Gates and Harvard were going to do an experiment on geoengineering there. And they call these experiments dimming the sun. And I always say, but the sun is our blessing. There's life on Earth because there's a sun. And you blaming the sun? And you want to block the sun from coming to the Earth, which is the basis of photosynthesis. Yeah? They call it dimming the sun. I think the US has passed laws to approve it. I don't know about UK. I think UK too is probably doing it. But I think we should start seeing it as one collective problem with different aspects. Chemtrails is one, dimming the sun is the other. But I was giving you the Swedish example. We mobilized together and we shut them down. Yeah. We shut them down.
Dr. Vandana Shiva, thank you so much. Can we have a huge round of applause for Vandana?